White text over video of past events. Logo, Cultural Access Collaborative. Professional Development Series presents Sensory-Friendly Program Roadmap. At left, presentation slides. All content will be voiced. At right, stacked mini videos of presenting speaker and ASL interpreter.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our sensor-friendly program, roadmap presented by Cultural Access Collaborative. My name is Susan Friel, and I am a steering committee member with the collab. I am a white woman with blue hair and blue eyes and wearing a cream-colored sweater today. Accessibility is a priority for us, so our program today includes live captioning provided by Efficiency Reporting Service, as well as ASL interpretation provided by Faith Interpreting Services. And if you'd like to view captions in a separate browser, you can do so using the stream text link included in the chat or by scanning the code on this slide. We encourage you to submit your questions to our presenters using the chat function. If you have any questions or issues regarding accessibility, please reach out to our support team via the chat function as well. And in case you find the chat pop-ups a bit bothersome, you can turn off Show Chat Previews by clicking the caret next to the chat button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So next slide, please. There you go. There's your information on the real-time captioning and the QR code that we talked about earlier. Next slide, please. For those of you not familiar with Cultural Access Collab, our mission is to empower Illinois' cultural spaces to become more accessible to visitors with disabilities. And there are 4 primary pillars central to our work. Those include free professional development workshops, like this one, an accessible equipment loan program, an accessible event calendar, and our growing statewide network. Next slide, please. So this afternoon, you will be hearing from 3 of our steering committee members who are active in other areas of the world as well. You've been hearing from me, Susan Friel. I'm also in the arts education with Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events. You'll be hearing from Aliyah Rich shortly. And right coming up next is Whitney Hill. Whitney, take it away.
Hi, Susan. Thank you so much. My name is Whitney Hill. I am a African-American female with short, black, curly hair, wearing a brown and red pashmina here because it's a little cold. Next slide, please. So when our committee got together and we were talking about this event, one of the things that we all felt really passionate about was know before you go. So we're going to look at a few examples of how know before you go information can be formatted to best provide full information for your folks coming to your events. And we'll talk a little bit more about why this is also very important, not only to the disabled community, but very much so for those with sensory concerns. So here on the screen, everyone who registered should have gotten an email that contains some of this information. So this is actually from our event, our Know Before You Go email. So a few best practices, great things that I'd like to call out with this is number 1, important access information is clearly included. And it also includes how to request for accommodations. So, taking out some of that guesswork of how to navigate, what to expect with the event. And then, of course, we have, the information, because typically, know before you go, there might be a lot of access information that you want to try to convey. So to kind of break up how wordy it is, the great thing about this is that the information is very neatly sorted and has a clear and concise wording. So once again, really taking out some of that guesswork and really making it very clear the information that you're trying to convey. Next slide, please. And then, so, you have your email all set up, and now you have just a general, questions about how do you interpret Know Before You Go for your actual website. So, one great example I love using is from the Newberry Library. This is from their website. Um, what is great about this is that the accessibility page is very easy to find on a website. It's in that top pan right corner. And when you click on it, it gives you all the access information. And then once again, keeping in line with this thing of clarity, all the information is clearly stated about, all the building accessible features as well as policy. Next slide, please. And then here's another great example. This is from Under the Umbrella, based out of Salt Lake City. So I really love this because they mention features that are not accessible. So this is great. Like, I know that in a perfect world, everything will be ADA compliant. But that's not the case for a lot of businesses, for a lot of events, whatever it might be. So including that language of, again, what someone might expect when they come to your venue can really prepare them best for navigating and wayfinding through your space. I also really love here, I always love, information that provides clear detailing about accessible parking as well as transit information. Next slide, please. Okay, and so we have, the email down, we have this understanding of how the website should look for Know Before You Go. What other formats? So this I really love because it really prepares the person, your guests, your attendees, it gives them a really clear idea of what to expect when they actually come in person to your event. So this is from the Chicago Cultural Center. This was actually created by DCase. Really great PDFs. If you go to their website, you will be able to download this pretty easy, which is one of the best practices. It's in a PDF format, so it's readily, easy to read with screen readers and other sort of, assistive tech like that. And then in addition to this, we always encourage a Know Before You Go video, which would basically be all this information that we're talking about, but, compiled in a video format. One of the other great things about this DCase PDF is that, again, easy to understand, easy to navigate information. All the content that a visitor might be expecting or want to know is clearly listed. And then with that, they provide really great graphics that help identify the space. So, for the visual learners out there, for, the folks who might need those reference points, it gives them that as well as a clear description underneath about what to expect. If there's a specialized entrance, if there's a different way to get inside, all that information is also clearly included. Next slide, please. And then lastly, also from DCase, this is from their collaboration with Millennium Park. This is great because they include on a very, as soon as you open the PDF and you start going through it, they include really great information about sensory concerns and what that might look like when you come into the park. So as you see here, they mention information about sensory-friendly breaks to those who might be blind and have low vision concerns, as well, of course, wheelchair and physical access. And then I'm a girly who really loves a good map and site plan. So I absolutely love that they include a map that shows really pertinent key access waypoints. Again, all this information really helps folks in the disabled community really best plan to come to your event, your space, whatever it is. But it really especially helps those with sensory concerns to navigate where, things might be louder, or there might be more of a fragrance, or, it just builds a better landscape. Next slide, please. So, with that, I am very excited to introduce Charlotte Chuck Gruman, who will be joining us today. You can check out the chat to access Chuck's full bio and learn more about her work. At this time, I would like to give a very warm welcome to Chuck and ask them to join me on screen and help us dive into the rest of our program.
Hi, everyone. I'm so grateful. Thank you, Whitney, for the introduction. Um, my name is Charlotte. I'm a blonde woman with creamy, whitish skin and what my 4-year-old niece calls golden-ish, yellow-ish hair. So not blonde, but much more like a princess. Um, Next slide, please. Awesome. Before we get started, which is going to be on the next slide, sorry, one more. There are some ground rules for this presentation. If at any given point you feel the need to move your body, I know that I can't see you or hear you, but I want to give you the freedom to move your body and do what you need to do in order to be comfortable and feel, happy while you're during this presentation. I have fidgets, and I will probably be moving my body around quite a bit during the presentation, so I'm sorry if that's distracting to you. This is something I'm very passionate about, so I tend to get very excited, and sometimes I talk too fast, and sometimes I mumble. So I rely on other people to tell me if I'm going too fast or if you're having trouble hearing me. Feel free to write it in the chat, and I'll try and slow down. Another thing is I tend to get off track easily, and the easiest way for me to stay on track is if I read my notes. So please, please forgive me if I drone on a little bit. I'll try and keep it exciting. Perfect. We'll go to the next slide. All right, there's a reason that there's a bunch of pictures of me on the screen right now. As I said, my name is Charlotte Gruman, and I'm an accessibility consultant and educator. I was extremely lucky to be raised in Singapore, which is a clean and modern country with phenomenal healthcare. And I was identified at a pretty young age as being on the autism spectrum and having sensory processing disorder. Now, at this point, my family did everything they could to make sure that this kid behind me had a happy and fulfilling life. And I was given every opportunity to receive occupational therapy, handwriting therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, everything you can imagine. And the reason I'm so passionate about access today is because I found when I moved to America for school that I didn't feel like I had that support. So although I was deemed bright, I was easily overwhelmed by all different types of sensory stimuli. And that's why these pictures of me are up here. These are all moments of my interventions growing up. So as a child, a young child, all the way on the left, this would manifest itself in different ways. Anything from yelling, maybe tears or a tantrum. Sometimes I would just shut down completely. Anything from the seams in my socks to the humidity outside could set me off, which would sometimes lead to teachers and adults flagging my behavior as disruptive. The left side of my body seemed to be behind and right in the right in terms of development, and my coordination and depth perception was off. I struggled to distance myself appropriately for different situations and would knock things over. And then I'd get hyperfixated on something for hours and hours at a time, but couldn't stay focused on a certain task for more than 30 seconds. So a lot of the classroom seemed to be where I struggled, especially in terms of my bad handwriting, my dyspraxia, my fine motor skills. And when I was in the first grade, my mother started brushing me as part of the Wilberger protocol. And Patricia Wilberger, shout out, a queen. My mom would brush me during the day, at morning, lunch, right after school, and in the evening. She would do it at school, and she worked so hard to make sure that I had access to this. I really appreciate all the time that she put into that. So let's get started on individualized sensory experiences. After we've talked about my personal experiences, I'm trying to show that there is possibility for wonderful sensory programming, especially including people in the process. So we'll go to the next slide. Perfect. So sensory processing or sensory integration refers to how we collect information through our senses and interpret it. So your body is relying on your brain to send and receive signals in your body indicating what you need. But everyone's brain processes that information and that data differently. It's our brain's method of understanding both the external world and what's going on inside us. It determines whether or not we respond or disregard input that's coming in. I'd like you to take a moment and think about where you're sitting or standing right now. What does it smell like? What does it feel like? We constantly adapt and respond to the sensory input. However, some people find sensory processing more difficult, which can lead to kind of like a fight, flight um, experience or freeze response, and it affects their behavior. But at the same time, everyone has a different sensory profile. So let's go to the next stage. Perfect. Sensory integration is the neurological process that organizes sensations from one's body and to the environment and makes it possible to use the body effectively within that environment. So, your brain has to take sensory information and follow certain steps in order to get the data it needs. First, it selects. The brain decides what sensory inputs are the most important to attend to at any given moment. I just want to check on the chat. Perfect. Okay, cool. All right, ASL interpreters, perfect. The brain decides which sensory inputs are most important to attend to at any given moment, and it filters out the background noise. It has to enhance, so important sensory information is amplified or sharpened to be more readily perceived or processed. Then it has to inhibit. It has to take away the unnecessary or distracting sensory information and to avoid overwhelming your system. Then your brain has to compare. The brain actively contrasts the different sensory inputs from various modalities, like your sight and touch, to make sense of the overall experience. And finally, it has to associate. So the sensory information is linked together to form a coherent perception of space. And it integrates different sensory inputs to make a unified understanding of your environment. Now, this process is essential for navigating your daily life and influences like every aspect of your functioning, like getting dressed, eating, moving, playing, socializing, learning, and working. But next slide. How do you know when you're hungry? How do you know when you're thirsty? How do you know when you need to use the bathroom? Are you tired? Are you hurting? Are you uncomfortable? Are you too hot? Are you too cold? Now, these are things that people with autism or sensory processing disorder or neurodivergence sometimes have a hard time understanding data from their body. So if we go to the next slide, we're going to talk about what we've all learned in school, our auditory, olfactory, gustatory, tactile, and visual processing, which is back to our 5 basic senses, which is hearing, smell, taste, touch, and sight. Now, if we think about these 5 senses, we're taught a lot about the phrase 5 senses. There's actually 3 more basic senses that our bodies are going through at any given time. Next slide. Perfect. So these 3 senses help you understand what's going on inside your body, what's going on outside of your body, and what is going on in your balance. So interoception helps you understand what's going on inside your body by collecting signals from your internal organs and sending them to your brain. So is your bladder full? Are you in pain? Proprioception is actually located in your muscles and your tendons and your joints. And so that affects your awareness of your movement and your force and position in the world. So how close are you to your surroundings? Are you prone to knocking things over? Constantly knocking things over. And then the vestibular sense is located in your inner ear, and that affects your balance and your spatial orientation. So how fast are you moving at any given point? And can you balance and adjust your body on a moving surface or an escalator? Or is that a hard challenge? Next slide, please. But besides from our 8 that we talked about, there's 5 other processes that our body needs to go through every day in order to understand our environment. So we'll start with temperature. How does your body know that it's hot or cold outside? That's your thermoreceptors. It's fascinating because unless we think about it, our body's senses are generally, I'd say, underrated. We don't give them a lot of credit. So the somatic senses is a network of neurons that help us perceive touch, pressure, pain, vibration, and movement. And the somatosensory system helps humans recognize objects and discriminate textures It can also help exchange social cues and communicate emotions like anger, fear, disgust, love, gratitude, or sympathy. We do that through touch. So the human body interprets information constantly through our network of sensory systems, and it's beyond those five that we commonly recognize. So when we talk about thermoreception, temperature, equilibrioception, that's our sense of balance and speed, mechanoreception, which is pressure, vibration, and gravity, nociception, which I've been mispronouncing for the entirety of my career until recently, which is your perception of pain, and chemoreception, which is understanding your tastes, smells, changes in pH, oxygen, and CO2. So all of these things are your body collecting information and data about the outside world and your inside world and processing it in your brain. Let's go to this part. Oh, sorry, not next slide. The sensory systems shape our daily experiences, from feeling the warmth of the sun to maintaining balance while walking. However, for people with autism or sensory processing disorders, these signals can feel heightened, diminished, or sometimes misinterpreted. Gentle touch might feel like an overwhelming thing, the end of the world, and background noises might be unbearable. Balance and spatial awareness can be challenging, and understanding these sensory differences is crucial in creating more inclusive environments, ensuring people's comfort, and improving communication for neurodivergent individuals. Now we can go to the next slide. So you can imagine it is easy to get overwhelmed if you have sensory processing disorder. I'll sometimes use noise-reducing earplugs or headphones to reduce auditory stimulus, or wear sunglasses indoors to reduce situational brightness. Some people on the spectrum with sensory processing issues can be much more sensitive to things, but they can also be less sensitive as well. And finally, some folks crave physical touch and the feeling of being squeezed while others can't stand it. So unless we're actively thinking about it, our senses are generally just an afterthought. But constantly, all day, every second, your brain is working to understand what's happening around your body. And you can imagine with people with sensory processing, it gets overwhelming fast and it can be really hard to recover from. So something you might experience while interacting with a person who has sensory processing issues, they might constantly touch object, play roughly, take physical risks, might have a high or extremely low tolerance for pain, squirms, fidgets, constantly on the move, has trouble maybe identifying personal space, and can often get distracted or feel anxious, clumsy, or uncoordinated. And I promise I did not write that last sentence about myself, but it just so happens to be true. Now, can we go to the next slide? So I just presented a lot of data and a lot of words. So I'd love to take a minute to reset. You can close your body or close your mind, close your eyes, move your body, whatever you need. And I do encourage people, if they want to doodle, I would doodle your current sensory surroundings. I think it's fascinating to understand where people believe that they are. So after a big deep breath, I'd love to move to the next slide. So what is sensory processing disorder? As I was talking about, it's a condition where the brain has trouble receiving, organizing, and responding to sensory information. And this means everyday sights, sounds, textures, smells, and movements can feel overwhelming or barely noticeable at all. So SPD can actually affect people in very, very different ways. And there's an interesting overlap between autism and sensory processing disorder, because not everyone with sensory processing disorder has autism, but the majority of folks with autism have an overlap into sensory processing. So people can be oversensitive, which is hypersensitive, and they feel things too intensely. So clothes that feel scratchy, lights might be too bright, and background noises might be impossible to ignore. You could also be hyposensitive, so it's not registering enough input. A person might seek out more stimulation, like spinning in circles or touching things or needing deep pressure. So different types of sensory inputs in different situations. So people with SPD may struggle with things others don't think about twice. A busy shopping mall chaotic and overwhelming to just anyone, but experiencing that with sensory processing disorder can be so overwhelming. And imagine at the same time, a tag in your shirt is painful instead of just being annoying. It's these challenges in sensory atmospheres can affect focus and your social interactions and overall well-being. A lot of the skills that I learned to cope with my sensory sensitivity came through years and years of occupational therapy. They weren't taught to me as a targeted treatment for my condition, but I found applicable uses of exercises and developed my skill set and coped with my disorder. But it can function a lot, or it can impact a lot. I'd like to go to the next slide. Executive functioning skills. Now, this isn't just for people with sensory processing issues. It's not just for people with autism. Executive functioning impacts every part of us. So it impacts our communication. Challenging communication can be a problem because if somebody struggles to retain information during a conversation, they might struggle to stop themselves from saying something that was mildly inappropriate or impulsive, or maybe hurtful. Individuals with autism or SPD might find planning difficult and feel overwhelmed or unsure about how to break down tasks into manageable steps. So they might struggle with organizing the necessary tasks to achieve a larger goal. Daily tasks like getting dressed, preparing breakfast, doing chores, all of those require working memory. And although a lot of people with autism have strong factual recall, using working memory for routine tasks can actually be a very significant challenge. Poor impulse control can result in harmful or self-destructive behavior. So, for example, a lack of control may cause someone to stay up all night obsessively researching a new hobby. I've only done that all the time. While individuals with autism can have intense focus, they may struggle to direct their attention appropriately. So sensory sensitivities can cause their attention to be drawn in different directions, like the ticking of a clock or bright lighting, and it makes it difficult to focus on more relevant stimulus, so conversations or what's going on around us. Verbal reasoning, people with autism sometimes have difficulty understanding and processing verbal concepts, which can hinder the ability to communicate in certain situations and different types of communication. And rigid thinking. Folks with autism often find it challenging to shift their thinking once they've made an educated decision. And this can make adapting to new situations difficult and lead to rigid and flexible opinions. All of these things are something we deal with every day, regardless of whether we're neurodivergent or not. But this does have a massive impact on executive functioning skills. Let's go to the next slide. You might also have noticed that some folks with autism have a different sense of urgency and have a lot more anxiety when changing the plan. So some folks who are neurodivergent may feel like they are experiencing something we call autistic inertia. And it can be extremely stressful, especially if someone has made a timeline, an internal timeline, they don't have to have communicated it about how their day is going to go. So this sense of autistic inertia, which is a phrase I think is quite fascinating, it includes the difficulty of resuming tasks after being interrupted, no control over actions even if there's a desire to do something. It can be indecision, anxiety, or challenges with planning or starting tasks, executive functioning, not being aware of time, difficulty adjusting movements to rapidly changing surroundings, like an escalator, a separation of the mind and body, feeling indifferent about the task or urgency of a task, and being able to focus on the task once it's started for a long period of time, which is often a strength. So the anxiety that I felt when I was changing the plan was less about the fact that my plan was changing. It would impact my timeline for the day. And I feel like I was running out of time because my sense of time is different than other people's. I'd like to go to the next slide, please. Perfect. So there are three key terms I'd love to talk about in terms of the sensory processing. Arousal does not mean the same thing as it does in romance novels. Arousal in this term refers to how awake or alert a person is. And this can change throughout your day. So if you're aroused and alert, maybe you've had a couple cups of coffee and you are able to stay on one task. Now, registration, it refers to the process of acknowledging or noticing new sensory information. So when the train goes by my apartment, I register that the train goes by and I can hear it. It's not always something I'm thinking about, but I'm aware that that's happening. And then self-regulation refers to how our nervous systems and our brains work together to interpret different sensory information. Some people with ASD might be more reactive to sensory stimuli and slower to turn to adjust to them. So, for example, someone with a noise sensitivity might startle at sounds like the lunch bell or a door slamming, which can increase their arousal and make it harder for them to refocus. Sometimes, even when they know it's coming every day at 3 o'clock, that 3 o'clock bell still alerts them and continues to startle them. Let's go. We're going to go to the next page. Perfect. So this is Dunn's model of sensory processing. Winnie Dunn, you're the best. And it explains how people's nervous systems or somatosensory systems work. So if in the top half quadrant, I've got low sensory registration and sensory seeking highlighted. Now, if someone has an underreactive system, we'll run the QA, perfect. They may have a high tolerance for neurological threshold. So low registrations, individuals might need a lot of sensory inputs to notice something. They might appear zoned out or not registering environmental stimulus. And sensory sensitivity folks, individuals are highly sensitive to sensory input and easily overwhelmed by even small amounts of stimulation. Now, with the self-regulation strategy, with a passive strategy, individuals tend not to actively change their environment to manage sensory input, even when they're overwhelmed. But somebody with an active strategy, they would seek or avoid sensory input in order to manage their sensory experience. So we've got the low sensory registration and sensory seeking for an underreactive system. Let's go to the next slide. So low sensory registration. People with low sensory registration might appear insensitive or disconnected, as they might often miss subtle environmental cues and they require clear and direct instructions. Everyday events may not provide them enough stimulation for their deep processing, and passive reaction approach to self-regulation can make them seem like they're unaware of what's going on around them or in their activities unless they're explicitly engaged. And they may struggle to recognize or process sensory inputs as readily as their peers, and they might also appear uninterested or inattentive to those surroundings. However, there are a lot of supportive strategies that we could take to engage folks that might seem like they're on low sensory registration. So, as I said, possible characteristics, they could appear passive or withdrawn, slow to respond to stimulus, shows minimal facial expressions, misses social or environmental cues, tends to be quiet. And if you notice that, here are some supportive strategies. You can verbally guide actions and outline step-by-step expectations for transitioning from activity to activity. You can provide gentle safety reminders. You can offer a fidget toy or an engaging activity for their sensory input. And you can help identify and interpret background sounds. So if the bell goes off and they don't react, you can say, oh, that was the bell. Now let's go to the next slide. Perfect. Sensory seeking. So they have a high tolerance for input for sensory things around them. They have active behaviors. So frequent touching of objects, engaging in risky activities like running, jumping, or climbing, enjoying loud sounds or making excessive noise, and putting non-food items in their mouth, chewing or sucking on objects. Some possible strategies for this is establishing a safe and structured environment and implement redirection techniques to guide towards appropriate behavior. So using do instructions instead of don't instructions. Instead of saying, don't stand on that chair, please sit your bottom on that chair. Providing opportunities for safe and appropriate movement is a key to dealing with sensory seeking folks. And I think it's important to note at this point, Dunn's model doesn't mean you are one or the other. Some people will be sensory seeking sometimes, some people will be sensory avoiding others. Let's go to the next page. We're going to talk about overreactive systems. This is the part that's hard for me because I have both hypo and hyper aroused systems for the sensory processing issues. And so It's low threshold for sensory input, which is the sensory sensitivity. People can easily become overwhelmed by sensory input and may withdraw from those environments. And then folks that are sensory avoiding, they can actively avoid sensory stimuli that they find overwhelming by leaving situations or using strategies to minimize that input. So covering of ears, hiding under tables, that kind of behavior. So let's go to the next slide. So sensitive individuals perceive and respond to more sensory input than others, and they often notice and comment on sensory events rather than avoiding them. So they can be easily distracted and may frequently express discomfort. And engaging in structures activities can help them manage their sensory experiences, and it reduces the risk of them feeling overwhelmed by unstructured or disruptive input. So characteristics for somebody who's sensory sensitive, they could be irritable or frustrated. They might have high demands and strong reactions. They could have a short temper or frequent outbursts. They might have difficulty maintaining focus, covering their ears or eyes in response to stimulus, discomfort or intolerance to movement, and observe and respond to individual cues. So providing alternative options or supportive resources to folks like that would be a really great way to offer a supportive strategy, encouraging breaks when it's needed, and using concise and simple language to reduce overwhelm. I am both sensory sensitive and sensory seeking, so it's a quite oh, Susan's here.
Well, hello there.
Hi,
I
Susan.
we're getting some responses here in our Q&A saying that this is a lot of fantastic information.
Sorry,
And
it's a lot.
it's a lot, and you are really rocking it. And we're just wondering if maybe folks need just a minute to kind of chill, throw in a few questions, and that might be a chance for everyone to kind of catch their breath. And then we can just get right back into it. You've got so much to share, and I'm really excited that you're here with us.
Great. Yeah, I'd love to take a break. Are there anything in the Q&A?
We actually do have a great question, and that is, what has been the best example that you've seen in a cultural institution for any of these kind of sensory concerns, and what made it good?
Oh, that's such a good question. I just got back from a program I got to do with Bell Shakespeare in Australia. And I have to say, one of the coolest experiences I've ever had was having a meeting with the folks at the Sydney Opera House. And they shared with me some of their tactile resources. They shared with me some of their recent experiences doing sensory processing or sensory friendly programming. And they showed me a new bathroom that is a family and accessible bathroom, but has a full size changing table for anyone of any size with an additional lift. And I think the inclusion of that bathroom design in a cultural institution that is worldwide, like everyone knows the Sydney Opera House, to make sure that they're taking details to or changing details to make it more accessible in a cultural institution like that. That was really wonderful and admirable to watch.
That's great. I also just want to assure folks that there is a recording of this and it'll be available to all the registrants after the fact. So no need to be furiously taking notes. We did put that in the chat, but I didn't know if somebody might have missed that and wanted to kind of know that in advance. And then another participant had a question for you about sensitive to movement. Can you say a little bit more about that? Does that mean difficulty in moving their bodies? Something you had referred to a little bit earlier in the same slide.
Yeah, that's a good question. I just want to clarify, sensory to movement or sensory through movement are two separate things. I would say that sensitive to movement in terms of driving in a car or having your body on a moving surface. If you have issues with your vestibular sense, you might become dizzy or disoriented. And some people might be sensitive to movement visual movement in front of their eyes. So Moving designs or flashing lights or strobing doesn't necessarily match with everyone. So that can be an issue for folks as well.
Fantastic. Okay. So we gave everyone just a little bit of a breather there, except for Chuck. Sorry about that. We didn't mean to have you answer all these questions. We will get to that soon enough. And we still have a good ways to go. If everyone just wants to take a minute to breathe, and then we'll get back started again. Thank you. Okay. Be sure to keep submitting those questions and we'll answer them all at the end. In the meantime, we'll let Chuck get back into the swing of things. Thanks again. Sorry for the interruption.
Charlotte speaks inaudibly.
Can you check your...
Perfect. I saw I saw that mute button. All right. I'm ready to move on to the last slide in terms of Dunn's model, which is sensory avoiding.
Susan leaves.
Now, sensory avoiding, I personally, I hate having my hair brushed, and especially by my mom as a kid, because I felt like it was actively pulling all my hair out. I like being squished or held between objects like couch cushions and small spaces and hugs. But if anything touches my body, like a clothes tag or even a piece of plastic in my clothing, I would have a legitimate meltdown. So to this day, I don't order clothes online or shoes online because I need to touch the fabric and feel the texture before I put it on my body. So if that sounds like someone you know, or if it sounds like you, I completely connect. So possible characteristics you might notice for somebody that's sensory avoiding. They could be covering their ears, moving away from crowds or loud sounds. They could be selective about their food choices. And the supportive strategy is paying attention to nonverbal cues. You can use a gentle tone and approach and offer alternatives to physical touch. So in a situation where you might say, oh, give him a hug goodbye, try a high five. Or try a thumbs up. And finally, creating or identifying quiet spaces for breaks and self-regulation. Now, self-regulation has a lot of terms. Another term for self-regulation and soothing is stimming. So you might hear me use that word. But really fast, I'd love to ask you all a couple of questions, and you can respond in whichever form you want. It looks like you're ticketing boxes with loud sounds or pitch ceiling. How does the spectrum work? Sorry. These are such good questions. I can't wait to get to them, but they popped up on my screen. I'm going to keep presenting and then hopefully we can get to them after. Could we go to the next slide? So there's different types of learning styles, and I'd love for you all to take a minute and try and think about your own learning style. Are you a visual learner? Do you like using images and videos? Are you an auditory learner? Do you like to absorb information by listening to it? So audiobooks or just YouTube on in the background. Are you a kinesthetic learner, learning by doing and moving, or reading and writing, text-based? Finally, verbal or linguistic. So envisioning and speaking words. There's a bunch of different types of learning styles, and every single person is different. And I want to mention all of these because it's not everyone's strength to communicate or learn in different styles. So I'll give a minute for people to look over this and think about what kind of learning style you prefer.
The chart lists visual, auditory, kinesthetic, reading and writing, and verbal or linguistic.
Perfect. And I have one more chart and I'd love for people to take a look at as well. So we could go to the next one. What kind of communication do you prefer? Whether this is in your professional life, whether this is in an educational setting or just your personal. Do you like asynchronous texting and responding when it's time instead of going back and forth? So delayed interactions. Do you like formal communication, so a structured and professional, or do you like informal, casual and spontaneous communication? Interpersonal, which is communication between people, or intrapersonal, which is dialogue within yourself. And finally, written, which is words in text format, visual information in images, verbal spoken word interaction, the synchronous, which is real-time interactions, or nonverbal, so beyond spoken words. At any given point, you're choosing the way that you're communicating to the world, whether that's to other people, through your professional connections or educational. I'd love for you to think about what learning style and what communication styles you prefer. You can write them in the chat, you can put them in the Q&A, or you can just keep them to yourself. But I just love for everybody to take a minute also and think about what kind of communication styles they prefer.
The chart lists asynchronous, formal, informal, interpersonal, intrapersonal, nonverbal, synchronous, verbal, visual, and written.
All right, let's go to the next slide. Now, this is something that's really fascinating to me, and this is something that a lot of folks with autism will talk about being a main struggle, and that's receptive language versus expressive language. So receptive language is the comprehension of language. It's your attention and your listening and your processing. This could look like disinterest in your speaker, misdirections, responses being different from the questions that were asked, and appearing distracted. Expressive language is the ability to communicate. So that's words and gestures and devices. If you're having troubles with expressive language, it could look like fragmented messages, limiting vocabulary, difficulty with word finding, short and incomplete sentences. So, oh, wait, sorry. It went over here. Perfect. So examples of receptive language skills is like following a direction, understanding and executing instructions. Put your coat on before you go outside. Understanding and vocabulary is grasping the meaning of words and phrases in context, like recognizing that bark can refer to both a tree and the sound dogs make. Identifying main ideas is extracting key points from conversations or written texts, like summarizing the plot or a chapter in a book. And making inferences, so drawing conclusions from implied information, like understanding someone's emotions based on their actions. And finally, recognizing nonverbal cues. So that's interpreting gestures, facial recognitions, and body language to gain additional meaning beyond what was just spoken. Now, some expressive language is the ability to communicate thoughts, ideas, and emotions through spoken or written language. And that includes verbal and nonverbal communication skills. So vocabulary and grammar and sentence structure allow individuals to convey messages effectively. So expressive language skills is speaking clearly, communicating ideas fluently and coherently, such as explaining a personal experience or summarizing a story, writing effectively, or organizing thoughts logically in writing, whether that's composing essays, emails, or writing a creative story. Using descriptive language, which is enhancing communication by providing very vivid details or describing a setting or an event in depth. Expressing emotion conveys feelings appropriately through words, expressing gratitude, excitement, or frustration. So, as you can imagine, having issues with both receptive and expressive language can really impact the way that you're communicating with people. And that also works for organizations trying to communicate with folks with disabilities. So, I'd love to go to the next slide. Excuse me. Here's some advice for interacting and general communication tips for folks with autism who might have neurodivergence. So using clear and concrete language, avoiding metaphors, idioms, or sarcasm while you're explaining things, and just don't assume that your body language will communicate your thoughts or your feelings sufficiently. Allow some time for processing. If you ask a question and you don't get an immediate response, allow time for verbal processing. Whether or not a person has indicated that they have a stutter, whether or not they have indicated that they've heard you, allow time for processing and don't assume that you know when that person has finished thinking or ready to talk. Avoiding open-ended questions, asking specific questions instead of, did you have a good time today? Maybe you could ask something specific like, did you enjoy the ride to school in the car? Another thing that's important is considering your environment and your volume. So if you're already in a space that's loud, raising your voice might not be necessary. And if you're in a quiet space, being mindful of your volume is important because we don't want to seem like we're yelling. Using cue transitions, so transitional phrases like first and then, helps set up expectations and a sense of order for the day and activities to come. And finally, using gestures. So pointing, waving, thumbs up, high fives are all nonverbal ways of communicating. Let's go to the next slide. Now, as community organizations and cultural groups, these are some things that you might want to consider sharing to a visitor before they arrive. So seating details and locations, whether or not there's designated quiet areas. Is there space to move around? Are there spaces in particular that have issues with volume? Where are entrances, elevators, and emergency exits? Are there lights or strobing effects? And how do you wayfind from parking or public transit? Finally, accessible bathrooms are very, very important. And it's important that folks know where they are, especially if not all of your bathrooms are accessible. Now, let's go towards what you can do to make your organizations more sensory friendly. Let's go to the next slide. You can offer sensory friendly or relaxed events and performances. You can offer the know before you go, as Whitney put it before. You can provide social narratives or stories, photos or video walkthroughs of the space. You can have designated times and schedules for people to come in, especially folks with disabilities. You can have clear instructions sent and directions and expectations that you've sent before they arrive. And fidgets, tactiles, and sensory-friendly resources. These are all really phenomenal tools that you can take to move forward with your sensory programming. I'll give a little bit more of some detail about social narratives because they can be extremely helpful to people. Social narratives are short stories that are designed to help individuals understand and navigate through social situations. And they're commonly used to support people with autism and help make public spaces more accessible. So they're tailored to an individual's need and level of understanding. You'll describe like a specific social situation and provide examples of different responses. So they adjust to changes in routine or unfamiliar environments, and they can teach us how to interpret social and physical cues and adapt our behaviors appropriately. So social narratives can enhance accessibility in spaces like theaters, like museums and galleries, and it explains what is to be expected at performances or exhibitions or even special programming. It can also be helpful in government buildings and public services. It helps people navigate offices, appointments, and public interactions. And educators, paraeducators, and cultural professionals, anyone can create the social narrative along with adding pictures and videos to encourage people to have an independent experience when they come to your organization. So I found a lot of my experience revolves around adults and young adults with autism or those on the spectrum. And especially for me, I found that a lot of sensory-friendly programs are designed for children. And that is wonderful, and I'm glad that that is happening. But I think it's also important to make sure that folks who are no longer children, who are no longer in school, are able to encourage the use of these sensory-friendly programs. So for example, if you have a tactile map of your space, although that might have been originally intended for somebody who is blind or low vision, that can actually be really helpful to someone like me who struggles with directions. So let's go to the next slide. So Braille program that might have a tactile map of your space could be beneficial to other folks. So this could be a resource for someone like me. In order to understand dimensionality, it can help with my issues with depth perception, distancing myself. But the touch tours can also be helpful when you're working with a neurodiverse audience because it allows patron to better understand your space physically. And in a theater setting, this can be tricky because you don't want to spoil the surprise by revealing the secrets. But in my honest opinion, the more information you can give your audience, the better. So these are 4 examples of different tactile maps and wayfinding tools that I've made. They're all different materials, and I wanted to highlight that. We've got a fabric one on the top left. That's an embroidered fabric map for the gardens. I can't remember. The Botanic Gardens. And then we've got the Cadillac Theater seating map in the middle and a map of Steppenwolf and the theaters inside Steppenwolf on the top right. And in the bottom corner, I've got a theater, Millennium Park for Harris Theater for Music and Dance, and that's laser cut acrylic sheets. Now, all of these tools are extremely helpful and can be used in different situations. Can we go to the next slide? Well, other thing I want to talk about is fidget tools, because I think people assume that fidget tools are all for children, but fidget tools actually affect our brain quite a bit. They help us engage both sides of our brain because they involve movement and sensory input. So when you're using a fidget toy, your body is processing touch, motion, coordination, and activates different areas in both of your right and left hemispheres of your brain. So this is why fidgeting for some people can help improve focus and concentration. Now, the key benefits are engaging the brain, obviously, but it boosts focus by keeping your hands busy, and it can help channel restless energy and makes it easier to concentrate. Like I said, it uses both sides of the brain, so many fidgets require coordinated movements, which activate both hemispheres. And studies find that fidgets can be especially useful for people with ADHD or learning challenges. So by providing a simple way to stay engaged, fidget toys can be a valuable tool for improving attention and learning, regardless of the situation you're in. And by providing them, we are taking away some of that social, I would say it's unwritten social rule that adults don't get to participate that way. And on the bottom right is my favorite picture of all of this, because it's a dementia care program that's been using fidget tools to work with folks that are losing their memory. And it helps them as well. Let's go to the next slide. So in this picture, we have weighted toys and lap mats, fidgets, puzzle toys, soundproofing headphones to lower sound levels. And this is an example of some of the tools that you could have at a sensory-friendly performance or event. So creating a separate environments like designated a sensory room or a quiet area, a place to safely move around, will allow more audiences to engage with what you're doing. Let's go to the next page. Perfect. So what's the result of this? Creating an accessible and comfortable environment for your guest allows them to feel like they're in charge of their experience, and they have the tools and media that they need in order to have an engaging and independent experience as well. So by encouraging audience members to interact in a way that suits them in their learning styles and their communication styles, we're removing this invisible boundary that is hard for neurotypical people to see, because the formality of a theater, of a museum, can be daunting to people like me who struggle to sit still. And vocal and physical engagement with pieces on display is not usually encouraged, which makes it that much more special when we allow people to engage with the work in a way that makes their bodies feel comfortable. And it takes away the stigma that only certain behaviors are tolerated in that formal setting. So allowing people to behave in the way that suits them will give you a much higher chance of making a meaningful connection with people. Let's do the best practices, which is the next slide. So services designed for one community in mind can often be beneficial to others. Captions, audio description, video, audio, or touch tours are amazing resources. Never touch a communication device or mobility equipment without explicit consent. Never make assumptions based on physical appearance about anyone's needs, or assume if a person needs your help. Ask first. If someone is speaking slower than you are, don't try and guess what they're going to say. Make sure to let them finish their sentence. And finally, offer as many different program options as you can. Choose your services to fit the needs of your community and create new initiatives that allow folks from the communities that you want to serve to be a part of the conversation from the beginning. Next slide. Other 5 things to consider: the affordability, availability, accessibility, accommodation, and acceptability. Now, this is from the concept of access, which is Penchansky and Thomas from 1981. How expensive is the experience you're offering? Take into consideration whether or not someone had to pay for an Uber or for transit. Is the experience available for me to walk up and use it, or do I have to call ahead of time? Is it physically accessible? If I use a wheelchair or have trouble with stairs, can I comfortably move through the space and to the space? And are there wheelchairs to borrow, or are there places to sit down? Do you have services already in mind to help people out? Or are you willing to develop them with communities? And finally, acceptability. Are you asking people what works for them and what they need to build a relationship with your organization? All of this leads to the next slide, which is meaningful interactions. Community participation is a vital part of human development and fosters life satisfaction, skill development, sense of competence, and emotional well-being. On my last slide, I'll point out that community events should be designed and available for everyone. So if you could go to one more slide, please. From child care, schools, theater venues, museums and galleries, parks, camps, libraries, public spaces should be accessible to everyone. And by creating social accessibility and cultural accessibility programs like this to make sensory-friendly programming more available, you are helping us move forward in doing this. So I'd like to thank the CAC, your wonderful resource. I'd love to thank our interpreter, Emylin, and we've got Aliyah as well. And thank you so much, Heather, for captions. I'm so grateful to have been here today. I'm sorry that I am so fast. All right, I hope you have a great day.
Hi, this is Susan. And I just want to thank Chuck. You really gave us so much to think about, so much. And I want to give everyone here just a minute to absorb that before we go on to our next speaker, who will be Aliyah, who will be coming on in just a moment. So let's just take a breather, everybody. If you have any questions, now is a great time to put those into the chat.
A group photo shows Aliyah smiling with people from Infiniteach.
Okay, I'd like to invite Aliyah to come on screen. Hey there, Aliyah. How are you doing?
I hope everyone's doing great. It's exciting to meet everybody. Sorry if I'm a little nervous. I'm not used to public speaking a lot, but it's good to see everybody here.
I'll let you
So
introduce yourself and give
yes.
your visual description as well. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Hello again. My name is Aliyah Rich. I'm a steering committee member. To give a brief description of myself visually, I am an African American woman. I have dark black hair, is very much braided. I have dark brown eyes and light brown skin, but I'm wearing a black t-shirt and have black pants. Before we move to the final part of this program, I kind of want to recenter all of us on the importance of sensory-friendly environments and experiences. To sort of give a short story of my life, I was diagnosed with autism at a young age of 2, and I went to a high school for people with disabilities, and I had the amazing opportunity to intern with Infiniteach. Was an amazing company that was all about creating resources for the autism spectrum as well as neurodiversity through museum spaces and well as a variety of programs. I witnessed firsthand so much of Infiniteach as a team, they who built themselves on the importance of sensory-friendly needs through building resources, technology, and training solutions. And I continue working with them because of how much they taught me as a person who with autism that you're not alone in this world. You have so much potential, and by creating these resources, you're kind of helping people within whatever space they are in to feel more comfortable, to feel more accepted. And um, when it comes to what we learn about ourselves is that sensory is more than just reducing overwhelming stimuli. It's about creating empathy, inclusion, and fostering communities that rely on sensory needs, whether young or old, like Chuck explained beautifully throughout her entire lesson. Even though I no longer work for Infinity, its mission kind of stayed with me throughout my life about how our world is always changing, and so too the needs of people. The change before is not really measured by how many people we leave behind, sorry. It's about how inclusively we build our future for ourselves, and whether we're young, whether we're old, whether we live with disabilities or have no disabilities. It's important for us as people to open our minds and our hearts to new possibilities for ourselves, to look at our own spaces, whether it's your schools, public spaces, offices, communities, and consider how they might reflect the understanding of diverse sensory needs. And it's important for us to embrace the challenge to see not only our own perspective, but also the perspectives of those who experience the world very much differently, as I experience the world differently than someone else with autism or anybody else with disabilities. But just to have it home is I hope everybody enjoyed our lessons. And now I'll pass it off to Susan for our Q&A portion. So thank you.
Next slide, Q&A. The speakers appear in a grid.
Hi there, this is Susan back again. Thank you, Aliyah. It really is great to have your personal perspective on this. And we welcome you to come back on screen, and
Yep.
also our other presenters, if we have a couple of questions for you. And if folks feel like they want to answer this question, you let us know.
Of course.
Let's start talking about someone here was asking about situations where people have different sensory needs. So maybe one need is in counter to another need, so they may conflict with one another. How do you handle something like that? How do you, and have you seen places where this has been handled well? How do you handle conflicting messages from one person? Either Aliyah or Charlotte, anybody want to answer that question?
I'd love to answer that specifically because I have been told by multiple people how grateful they are that I'm doing the work that I'm doing, but how ironic it is that I am advocating for a quiet space, considering how loud I am. I sometimes struggle with my volume modulation and get too excited, and in the hopes of creating a very calm and soothing space, I might be a little bit louder. Uh, but the big thing is that everybody's going to have different needs. Everyone is going to have competing needs. And so, although a quiet space might be designated as quiet, if there's no one else in the space and somebody needs to move their body, we can try and be flexible and encourage them to use that space for something else. So, if they don't want to be quiet, what can they do instead? Are they allowed to jump? Are they allowed to run? Are they allowed to make noise? And if not there, where? So working with people to ask what they need instead of just assuming is a huge note on that, but recognizing that as humans we're fascinating and have competing needs and differences of thinking quite honestly all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, I kind of agree with Chuck. It's just that everybody goes through different experiences in life. Like for me, I'm very quiet. When first people meet me, I don't normally talk. I just kind of wait for somebody to talk to me. It's just like everybody has that experience, and when it comes to like places, it's always nice to have the option to yourself, not just like for someone with autism, because somebody with who is very much not into crowds, not into going to parties. They're very much quote called introverts. Is that people always have something to themselves. So why not create that space? Is to be inclusive to not just me, but for everybody who can benefit those spaces.
Thank you. Thank you both. There's a question here that's actually quite interesting, thinking about partially the know before you go aspect that Whitney was talking about, but also best practices for informing an audience of potential sensory triggers. I mean, we talked about not like spoiling a surprise. And it's not necessarily, something that people are going to anticipate. It's not specifically a sensory friendly performance or relaxed performance. But how do you let people know that they can anticipate something like a loud noise or something suddenly happening, but to give sort of a general understanding of that, but not like, avoiding the spoiler alerts. And also if it's not specifically a sensory identified as a relaxed performance.
Yeah, I don't mind jumping in. So this kind of reminds me of a few years ago, I did an access survey at a museum. And we brought in a bunch of folks from the community to kind of just go through the space as they normally would and just kind of take their feedback. And it was interesting that quite a few people who had non-apparent disabilities, in particular those who had sensory concerns, kept saying over and over again, the room had flashing lights. I wish there was a sign on the outside saying flashing lights or strobes. You might not, you're not going to ruin the surprise by giving that warning, but it's really distressing for a lot of folks if they come onto, your place and now they're surrounded by a sensory that's really overwhelming. And that really ruins their experience overall, so just some signage or some warning can definitely just, really help folks be fully engaged as they can.
I'd love to pop on just for a second. A huge and wonderful resource that I would recommend is the Smithsonian Guidelines for Access. A couple years ago printed out what they had available online and made it into a binder, and they've developed so much more that there's no chance I could print it all. But they have a guideline for sensory guides, which is the phrase I would suggest looking up if you're interested in this, is looking up sensory guides. And they have a great way of exploring the different sounds and environments that there are different experiences and museum galleries and openings all throughout the Smithsonian Institution, with sensory guides for any of them that have major flashing lights or lights or sounds. So I highly suggest that Smithsonian resource.
Thanks for that. This is Susan again. Can you speak a little bit, Chuck, someone had talked about, you had said active strategies to avoid sensory discomfort. So I'm thinking about this moment where somebody's having like an overload. Could you elaborate a little bit on what might be an active strategy that someone could use?
Absolutely. When I referred to active strategies, I was talking about active strategies to engage and stimulate our senses. So if that's swinging or jumping or stimming, moving your body, if that's playing with a fidget, kinetic sand, all of these things are things that we can use to engage our brain. But so when I referenced active strategies, it's activities that help regulate someone. So everyone has a different thing that would regulate them. But if you're with a person with autism or a family member or somebody around, you can ask what is something that they do to calm themselves. And a lot of people have those self-regulation tools, even if they don't know how to verbalize it exactly.
Okay. Kind of sticking to the performance aspect here, we have a question from someone who's asking about a sensory-friendly classical concert. And they're asking what are the considerations for the size of concert space? I know there's may not be like a one size fits all, but what are some of the considerations in a larger space? What are the considerations in a smaller space? Would someone like to answer that?
Hi, it's Chuck again. I'm so sorry. I just really fast on this one want to mention a huge part of the sensory friendly programming that I'm suggesting people take, as well as other folks in our community, is you are trying to engage folks in a way that engages them in the way that you're doing it already. So if you're having a performance in your space, I'd highly encourage, unless you think that space is untenable, to have the sensory friendly performance be in the same space that an everyday performance would be. And that way people don't feel like you're treating them differently. You're just providing them the experience and what they need to engage with that traditional performance. You're not taking away any of the artistry. You're not taking away any of the beautiful architecture, I'm sure. It just, if it is a choice in choosing a space for a sensory friendly, I would choose your original space. And if it's untenable, I would reach out to folks that you're hoping to provide those services for.
Great, thank you. This is Susan again, and I'm asking about sort of thinking back to that idea of space. So this is a question from an OT student who is currently working on a capstone project at an architecture firm, which sounds like a great place to begin this conversation way back in the beginning, right? And the person says, my goal is to educate and provide resources on sensory processing differences to impact environmental design. And the person is wondering what inclusive design features, specifically furniture, visuals, etc., that could be implemented into the environment to support individuals with various sensory processing challenges. So going right back to the drawing board, if you had your druthers, what would you add to the environment?
So this is Whitney. I think that's a great question. I one of the clients that we're working with has been kind of going back and forth with this question as well. And it's really been interesting seeing how they've really expanded and really taken to heart how, as a lot of what Chuck has mentioned, the material objects and the tactility of if it is a chair, maybe it is a desk, what's that material like? Same with lighting options, is there, some adjustability with the lamp and how bright it is? Is there some adaptability with the chair so that you can move in it if you do need a stem, or is everything really static? I think that all of these little kind of details help kind of build a bigger picture of how, you can make a more sensory friendly space.
Thank you for that. So we have a question about the tactile maps. I personally, I love these things, and this is Susan again, and I just wanted to like reach through and grab those. So if you would be able to say a few more things about their uses, any kind of recommendations you might have on sizes. I know before we began, you had all your toys out there and you're sharing them with us. Maybe you could give us a little insight into that.
Absolutely. This is my favorite thing to talk about. It's Chuck.
Go for it.
So for those of you that don't have video capabilities or aren't able to see me, I'm going to hold up a 3D printed plastic thing. And I say plastic thing because unless I'm there to explain it, this interior of a theater doesn't really make a lot of sense. But this is actually the inside of Second City's smaller theater space. And I've got the stage printed here. The funky thing about this is the seating is different dependent on the situation. So folks can see with their folks that can see with their camera on, you can see that I have the entryway with the stairs. I've got the platform up here and the changing room and the bathrooms behind the stage. Now, this information is something that it allows people to understand their space around them. It's not just for people that are blind or low vision, but I've found that having something that is, say, the size of a shoebox or smaller, so that folks can have it in their lap if they need to, they can be interacting with it. Generally, I will have different types of tactile maps at other events, and I'll use different materials, like I said, acrylic earlier, 3D printing. But this is a really cool wayfinding tool. But it's also great for people who are blind or low vision because you're able to orient yourself in the space. If there's multiple pieces of a moving set, where do they arrive on this space? And I've been using and experimenting with the use of magnets and moving them around a magnetic board so people are able to follow not only what's happening with the sets, but also different characters. So tactile maps can also be used for other things. This is an example for a theater. But if you want to learn more about tactile maps, please reach out to me. It's my favorite thing in the world to talk about.
Could you, this is Susan, could you speak a little bit about what the process was to have these created? Like, what did you go through to get these created?
Absolutely. It is a lot of the times me taking a map or a wayfinding tool, drawing a design, and then creating a 3D image of it. So if I'm 3D printing, I have to do a 3D model unless someone already has that modeled for the space. But I have multiple 3D printers, and because of my wonderful, wonderful, generous sponsors for 3Arts, I won the 2023 3Arts Award and was given $30,000 to work on my accessibility programming for theater. I now have 3 3D printers. I have a laser cutter. I have 2 Cricuts. I have welding tools and wood tools. So I'm experimenting using different materials and recycled materials, and whatever theater, museum, any venue has, especially of like recycled materials, to make tactile maps. So you start with a drawing, you start designing, and then you build depth, usually build depth up.
That's fantastic. So this is something that typically is it something that you are designing for yourself or somebody's asking you to design it? What is the kind of the process behind this? Is this something that you get to decide all the content? You're like, this is what I want to put in here.
Well, for these maps,
Mm-hmm.
so I do something that I think I was originally recognized for 3Arts, is something I called guerrilla accessibility, where I would go online before going into a venue and find seating maps or find any public information I could find. And I would build it and then show up so that people didn't have the chance to say no. So yes, I was the one, I get to choose certain details. But generally, if you show up with something already made, people will accept it. I've had a lot of fun building different materials for different theaters and venues all over the city. And most recently got to build a really wonderful, phenomenal, moving, tactile version of Bell Shakespeare's modular theater. And it had over 524 seats in different configurations. And so I was able to choose which modulations of the theater I wanted to build. But I'm just experimenting and developing this process. It's not something someone taught me to do. It's something I'm learning through experience and experimentation. So again, I said it before, but I'll say it again. It's my favorite thing in the world to talk about. So if anyone has questions or is excited about the possibility of tactile maps or resources, please reach out to me.
That's quite
Everyone
wonderful.
on this panel knows that I will talk about it all day, so I'm going to stop myself now.
Okay, so people are going to be approaching you now. You know this, right? To ask for a map.
I hope so.
So I think we'll take this our final question. We do have another huge question coming up, but I think it's so big, I don't know if we can handle it now. But this other question, I think we can talk about briefly. Just wondering if you have seen the sensory-friendly setup that the Philadelphia Eagles are providing. And I don't know anything about that. So if the person who asked that question has input, you can take yourself off speaker, perhaps, and clue us in.
I think I know who this is. If I understand correctly, I might be wrong. This is my mother. All
right, Mom.
Because I did not get to respond to her article she sent me on Facebook, but yes, the Eagles have developed a wonderful situation, and they've also put in quite a bit of funding. It's called the Eagles Huddle Up for Autism, and they're working with the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and they're creating sensory experiences. They have the Eagles Autism Foundation, and they have noise canceling headphones that are available for all the home games. And I know that they have an advocacy program. I'm not very familiar with it, but I think it's really cool because a lot of major sporting events aren't traditionally considered sensory friendly. But that is something really cool to be aware of as well.
Well, thank you. This is Susan again. Thank you so much. I just wanted to say we have 2 more minutes. And if you can do this in 2 minutes, go for it. But someone has said that they do not classify themselves as neurodivergent, but really found themselves ticking off the boxes when you were speaking about loud sounds, repetitive movement, the ceiling fan, the peripheral vision, all that stuff. So here's the $64,000 question in 90 seconds. How does the spectrum work? Sounds like we have a whole new session going on here, but I wanted to let that person know they were heard.
Again, this is Chuck. And again, the spectrum is a spectrum for a reason. It is not one size fits all. Everyone's brains are different. It's fascinating, it's engaging, it's wonderful, it's terrifying, but everyone's brains work differently. So we have to find a way to communicate with each other using skills that we have and noting maybe skills that other people don't have. So the spectrum works in all types of mysterious ways, but I would say consider talking to someone. There's a bunch of online quizzes, and if there's something in particular that you're connecting with, whether that's sensory avoiding or sensory seeking, I would take a minute to do some research, especially with sensory processing. It could be something you've not realized could be impacting your life. So give yourself some grace, but definitely explore that. I'd highly suggesting.
Well, thank you so much. This is Susan saying thank you to Whitney and to Chuck and to Aliyah for sharing your personal experiences and giving us a lot to think about. I know people will be coming through this recording when they get it. It's going to be a lot. And we hope that you will join us for our next program on March 20th. It'll be at noon. And the name of this program is Where Are You Going? Where have you been? Accessibility self-assessment for your organization. Open Doors has developed a comprehensive self-assessment tool for cultural institutions at all levels of accessibility journey. And partners from cultural institutions and ADA experts collaborated on creating a tool with disability voices centered in this work. Self-assessment is a must for any organization seeking to be more accessible. And you can learn from Open Door art staff how the tool was created, how your full organization can engage in completing it and using it as a guide for future initiatives. So stay tuned for an email from us once registration opens. So use the QR code on the screen. Next slide, please. There we go. If you would like to donate, and I know that you do, your support allows us to continue our efforts to expand accessibility support and learning events across Illinois. As well, please fill out the brief survey posted in the chat, and it'll be sent to you also via email following the event. And we will now bring to close today's program. Thanks to everyone, to all the presenters, our accessibility service providers, the CoLab production team, and mostly thank you to you, for all of you, for supporting the Cultural Access Collaborative. At this time, the session is concluded. Please exit the Zoom meeting and do take care.
Credits appear. Sensory-friendly program roadmap presented by Cultural Access Collaborative. For workshop resources and more information, visit culturalaccesscollab.org. Presenting speakers: Susan Friel, Moderator, CAC; Whitney Hill, Accessibility Specialist at LCM Architects and Director at SPORK; Charlotte Chuck Gruman, Accessibility Consultant, Advocate, and Educator; Aliyah Rich, Content Developer at Infiniteach. Workshop Accessibility: Efficiency Reporting, Real-Time Captioning; Faith Interpreting, ASL Interpretation; Video Editing, Captioning, and Audio Description by BridgetMelton.com.